Good to see you again. AP World History, my Waptors. We're going to continue with the lecture from the class today. Hopefully this means that I'll get through it and this video won't be too long, but here we are. I'm not narrating with PowerPoint, you get me. Hopefully you can see everything up there. So we're going to start with religion. Of course, last we left off we were talking about the Varna system with the castes, and we talked about all the caste system. Basically, this caste system where we left off was rationalized by this belief in reincarnation, that every individual has an immortal spirit or Atman that will be reborn into another body after death. Now the goal isn't eternal life here, where you're just being born and born again and living as different people or famous people throughout history. That's not the goal. Actually, the goal is to be free of this cycle of rebirth, or to achieve oneness with Brahman. We'll get to that in a little bit in terms of Hinduism. But one's station in life, in the next life, does depend on one's actions, or karma. So depending on if you do good actions and you build up good karma, you might be born into a higher caste, whereas if you do not, you'll be born into a lower caste. In the Vedic religion, it emphasized the worship of male deities through sacrifice to these deities. Religious knowledge and practice was something that the Brahmin did, the highest class, of the highest caste, excuse me. When the Brahmin and priestly Varna memorized rituals, prayers, and hymns, and they were the sole keepers of these. So tonight you're actually reading some examples of the Vedic hymns, and so those would have been memorized by this highest caste. But we also think that maybe this caste also opposed the introduction of writing in order to maintain their monopoly on this religious practice. And this is something that we see in even other religions. In Christianity, at the time of Reformation, people were very opposed to religious texts being printed in people's native languages, because it was the priests and the bishops who were responsible for interpreting this for the people. And they did not want to lose that. As far as women, we don't know a whole lot about the roles of women during this period. They could study and participate in rituals, they could own land, and they usually married in the middle or late teens. And that's kind of about what we got with them. But this brings us to two different, well, really three religions that we're going to look at in this period. Jainism, or Jainism, as your book it says it's pronounced, but you know I have butchered everything today. So that, and Buddhism. And so what we see is in this time period, this Vedic time period, people react against this social hierarchy, this caste system that develops, this very rigid way of life that's associated with the Vedic religion. And so people start to withdraw into the forests of India and go pursue their own kind of religious journey. And so we see it through yoga or special diets, meditation. And out of that comes these two religions, Jainism and Buddhism. The goal, of course, of these religions was not to continue to be reborn over and over again, but achieve this thing called moksha, or a liberation from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Basically, you wanted to achieve your maximum karma level so that you would be free of this cycle of rebirth. The ideas of these dissidents are reflected in this book, and I always mispronounce it, but the Upanishads, or as I think I was told today, Upanishads. I tried. Your book says Upanishads in its pronunciation, so if you pronounce it that way, do your best. But this is the collection of these different ideas that people had, basically breaking away from what had been the standard. So let's talk about Jainism here. It's founded by Mahavira, who lived from 540 to 468 BCE, and the followers of this religion practice extreme nonviolence. It's kind of odd. Extreme nonviolence, basically so nonviolent that they would try to keep from killing any living thing, wearing masks over their face to keep from breathing in insects, and at times sweeping the ground in front of them to make sure they didn't step on anything or any living thing. And the most extreme of the followers of this actually went naked and occasionally, and then eventually would starve themselves to death because they would deny themselves of anything that could possibly harm creation. The less extreme devoted themselves to jobs that didn't have to result in violence of any kind. So, for example, they wouldn't farm because that could lead to violence against animals who were used. So they devoted themselves to things like commerce and banking, which nowadays may be the source of the biggest violence in the world. But anyways, they didn't require people to kill. And in this picture, this is not the Buddha, this is Mahavira, the founder of that religion. Buddhism, on the other hand, was founded by Siddhartha Gautama, otherwise known as the Buddha or the Enlightened One. He basically rejected everything that he had been given. He was very rich, and when he saw the outside world, he decided that that wasn't what he wanted. He wanted to really kind of find his own way. And so he rejected everything, had years of asceticism, and set forth coming back and teaching about what he called the Four Noble Truths and how people could achieve enlightenment along an eightfold path. So basically he lays out these ideas in his teachings. This is a statue of the fasting Buddha. It's a sculpture showing the effects of a protracted fast. Basically, this idea that denying yourself some things might actually help lead you to spiritual purity. Some of the followers of Buddha took vows of celibacy, nonviolence, poverty, and the original form centered on the individual's attempt to gain enlightenment through this moderation, through self-discipline, and through meditation. And that's kind of the common form we see the Buddha take, or Buddha statues take, this idea of the meditating Buddha, etc. The goal of Buddhism was to achieve the state of nirvana. That's for Buddhists, the release from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And by achieving nirvana, they would escape that. They would somehow achieve that ultimate karma, hopefully by following that eightfold path. But they didn't believe in an eternal soul necessarily. Buddhists believed in that all things were composite, basically, were not eternal, including the individual person, which is very different from the Vedic belief in this eternal soul or Atman. After the death of Buddha, he basically gives no real instructions, just tells people, to follow their own way. And his followers organize themselves in monasteries, nunneries, and they're all over the world nowadays, including Batesville, Mississippi. They develop a complex hierarchical religion. There's a worship of the Buddha, reverence for people trying to gain enlightenment. We call those bodhisattvas. And then, of course, there's plenty of artistic representation of the Buddha, which are venerated. The religion broke into two major schools we see, Mahayana and Theravada. And Mahayana incorporated new beliefs to Buddhism, whereas Theravada more closely followed the original teachings of Buddha. But we see with Buddhism, a lot of its beliefs, a lot of its ideas are actually going to be absorbed by Hinduism, actually. So let's talk about that rise of Hinduism. The Vedic religion basically will adjust and evolve into what we consider modern-day Hinduism. And it does so, quite some time ago. It's a religion of hundreds of millions of people today. And the term Hinduism actually comes from an outside term. It's kind of imposed on these people, which is this idea of what the Indians do. But now it's come to kind of understand, encapsulate the religion as a whole. Keep in mind it incorporated Vedic traditions, both from the north of India and Dravidian customs from those in the south. So kind of the Aryan and the Dravidian culture combined. And we can see some of the strains of each in Hinduism. It definitely provided a lot of ways to approach God and worship. And a lot of this is through veneration of different gods. So we have Brahman, who's the creator, and Vishnu and Shiva, the preserver and destroyer, respectively. They assume prominent positions in Hinduism. Where they had been minor gods in Vedic traditions, Vishnu and Shiva become major gods for Hinduism. Here is an image of Brahman, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. You can see a lot of these. If you just search them, you'll get a lot of examples of these three figures, three gods in art. I misspelled destroyer there. Please forgive me. Anyways, going back to this idea, the presence of many gods and sects and practices in Hinduism really reflects the diversity of India. You have the gods from the north and gods from the south. Vishnu, for example, was from kind of the northern Aryan tradition, and Shiva was venerated in southern India as part of the Dravidian culture. The presence of gods are seen kind of as a manifestation of a single divine force. So there's kind of an overall spirit, overall God, Brahman, from which the rest flow. And people try to obtain divine favor with the gods, and still do. This was done through trying to understand sacred truths, through mental or physical discipline, same thing we see with Jainism and Buddhism, and then through devotions to deities or certain gods. This could also be through service to a deity, what's called puja. It's very common, maybe bathing, feeding, or even clothing a statue to a deity. Again, here's the image we just saw. Another thing for Hinduism in order to obtain favor might be pilgrimages or journeys for a religious purpose to a place. For example, a pilgrimage to the Ganges River, which is considered especially sacred in Hindu culture for its purifying powers and its restorative powers. And so millions of people per year will make this trip to the Ganges River and bathe in its waters. Religious duties of people were really dependent on a person's class, gender, stage in life. So depending on where you were in life and what gender you were and what caste you were in, that would determine what your duty was in Hinduism. So what about today? Well, Buddhism and Hinduism today are still around. They're still very prominent world religions. But Hinduism sort of wins out in India because it absorbs some of the aspects of Buddhism. And it responded to sort of what the people needed and what they were comfortable with. Buddhism rejected a lot of Vedic culture. And so Hinduism is going to basically kind of merge with that. It's going to be the evolution of it. And so that's very common. Buddhism actually will take root in Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Asia. And that is where it's most prominent today. But Hinduism, its personal deities with direct connections to the people, that is going to be what really takes hold in this society that we see. As far as that's it for today's lecture that we started in class. Tomorrow, I want to look at the sources that I shared with you in class today. Make sure you read through those, looking at the descriptions, especially of of all three documents. Look at the descriptions for especially the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedic hymns, and also the excerpt about men and women from the Kama Sutra. So keep in mind that all these texts can tell us something about this society and what was important to them and how they viewed religion, how they viewed themselves, how they viewed the gods and the gods' role in their lives. So make sure you do that tonight, and have a wonderful evening. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.